Sometimes they are, and sometimes they're not. Welcome to this episode of Am I the Asshole? Our first one is from main performer 661. Am I the asshole for telling my family no more to monthly family dinners? Ever since my dad was a kid, our family has done monthly family dinners. Nicer ones than your average family dinner. It's something our family did when my siblings and I were kids too. We'd have grandparents over and we'd all have a nicer dinner together. When my siblings and I grew up, we still did it, only instead of what happened before, where branches broke off over time and did their own, they decided we should include partners and spouses and our kids as a whole in one. By the time I was 19, the family had decided that they would take turns hosting each month to lessen the burden. My wife was excited to be a part of them at first. We started during our relationship. I did the cooking to start, and then she took over after a while because she wanted to. My family had seemingly got along with my wife before this point, but they were overly harsh of her cooking, with the exception of my two younger siblings. She tried to make them happy, but no dice. I told them they could be kinder. They said she should cook better or cook different things. My wife didn't make anything they don't eat, but nothing was right. She grew frustrated and I grew suspicious. So we hosted a couple of months ago and I told my wife we were going to pretend I did the cooking, just to see. She told me she felt like they just weren't fond of her food. I pointed out nobody had the same amount of complaints as them, and they even criticized the steak and potatoes they all seemed to go crazy for. She went along with the plan, and when my family thought I'd cooked it, they loved it. Said it was so good my wife had decided to let a real talent take over. That it was so nice to have something a little different, curry, and all this very lovely stuff. My younger brother and sister weren't fooled, but they enjoyed watching the rest of the family dig a hole. When the rest of my family heard it was my wife's food and not mine, they tried so hard to backtrack on all the nice stuff. The rest of the dinner went in tense silence and my wife's eyes were opened. I told her I was done with these dinners and she was my priority. She felt a little bad. I told her we could have dinners with my younger brother and sister sometimes. It's less stress anyway. When we didn't show up to last month's dinner or this one, my parents and siblings started asking questions. I told them each time we weren't going again, but missing two made it sink in. They told me we need to be there. I said never again. My wife doesn't deserve their disrespect. I told them they ruined what they wanted by being assholes to her. They said I was overreacting, making very relationship-harming choices, and treating them badly for simply having issues with my wife's food. They also said to think of future kids and how they'll miss out. Some of it got to my wife a little, which I've tried to reassure her about. Am I the asshole? I fail to see how one could be an asshole when the family themselves were acting like assholes, especially if the OP ended up making the food and the family loved it, but then said that the wife actually made it and they tried to backpedal. Yeah, the family's the one that made the relationship-harming choice by criticizing the wife. Definitely not the asshole. And our final one is by Lucky Indication 928. Am I the asshole for telling my mom to shut up and accept that my wife and I aren't naming our kids the way she and dad named me and my siblings? My wife and I, both late 20s, had our first child together in June. Before he was born, there was a lot of talk about names from different family members on both sides, but the pressure to tell was on my side specifically. We didn't tell a soul what the name would be until our son was born and we had left the hospital. My parents were disappointed when we announced our son's name. My family are very traditional in how they named us. We were each named after grandparents, and that's how they feel everyone should name their kids. My wife's family don't have a tradition when it comes to naming babies. They just name them and go. No fuss or insisting on certain names. But my wife's side tends to favor more uncommon and unusual names. My wife's and my taste buds tend to lean a lot more to her side than to mine, which is how we ended up choosing the name Hollis for our son. This was not something my parents liked because they expected our son to be either Jack, my dad, or Parker, my father-in-law, but I know they were expecting a little Jack to be born. So that added to their reaction. But they quizzed us on our choice to break tradition, and I told them it wasn't a tradition my wife's family used, and we decided we weren't going to have one either. Over the last couple of months, both parents have questioned why, have wanted to discuss other names for future babies. My mom has been the worst by far. She asked why we went with something so unlike the names we have in our family. I told her our family wasn't the only one involved, but that we also didn't take the family's tastes into account. We went with what we liked. She pointed out our taste is a lot like my in-laws, and I said yes, but that it wasn't about my in-laws and their taste, it was about my wife's and my taste. I told her I was done discussing it, and since that point, I now change the topic or end the conversation when she brings it up or refuses to let it go. We had a little naming ceremony on Saturday, and my mom decided she was going to dig in her heels about the name, and she told me we'd picked a stupid name and she hated it. She wanted us to change it and name him Jack or Parker. She told me we had no business breaking a long-held tradition in our family, and there's a reason those traditions are there, so foolish people can't name their babies the worst names imaginable. She also said that my in-laws must be so smug thinking they'll have at least 2 stupidly named grandkids, like they had all stupidly named kids. I lost my temper. I told her to shut up and accept that we're not naming our kids like she and my dad named me and my siblings, and I told her she would need to leave and learn to be more respectful, because I would not take those insults against my wife or her family lying down. My mom hated being told to shut up, and she said I had no excuse for rudeness to her face. I thought she was crazy when she was rude. Am I the asshole though? In my opinion, you're definitely not the asshole because that's your child, not your mom's, not your dad's. Technically, yeah, the child is part of your family, but you are not required to follow family tradition that your parents chose to follow. The only asshole I see here is the mom bitching about the name. Alright, that's enough stories for the day. Well, that wraps up this episode of Am I the Asshole? If you liked the video, please drop a like, share my content on all of your social media, subscribe if you haven't already, and make sure to hit that bell so you're notified every time I upload, and drop a comment down below. It really helps with the algorithm and helps new people find my channel. Thanks for watching, thanks to my patrons and super thanks contributors. Have a great day and stay safe out there.